Okay, days of quarantine, days of creation, days of pivoting, days of changing. So we're going to talk about remote work. We're going to talk about how that's a step towards virtualization, and then how that's a step towards maybe a distributed company, a distributed organization. So as always, shameless plug, go to Amazon.com, plug in, you could get my book, Most Businesses Fail in the First 5 Minutes. But you can also get the book we just wrote called Remote Work for a Better World. And if you just put in remote work in Amazon, we're like the #1 result there for remote work. We're like top 50 in 3 categories. So you'll get some good stuff, some awesome content from not just me and John and some of the other guys that maybe some of you are familiar with, but other people that are also superstars and have tons of experience with remote work and with virtual teams and virtualization as a whole. And so let's talk about why these 3 steps work that way, okay? So 1, we start with remote work. Why? Because we got to figure out, basically we got to figure out 3 things. We got to figure out the technology. We got to figure out the psychosocial and something like transpersonal skills, let's say. So this is 1, this is 2, and then we also got to figure out logistics. Okay, what are the logistics of our own personal situation, of what we do? So first we talk about technology. So what are all the little pieces of technology? Most people say, well, all you need is one platform, like Zoom, for example. And we do talk a lot about Zoom in the book, but it's not just a book about using Zoom, because Zoom is just a tool. What matters is how you use it, how you use that tool, what are the different techniques you use that tool with, and also how do you use it in concert with other things, like other tools, and we call those steps, we call those tool chains. And John's gonna have a nice Facebook Live on Friday about tool chains. So that's the technology piece. We talk a lot about that in the book. Then we talk about the different things. So like if you've never worked from home, what are all the different things you have to learn about yourself, about how much you can work, about maybe dividing around your house or wherever you live. This is the place where I work, right? Because a lot of people think that, especially people that have never worked from home, wow, like such a dream to work from home, right? Which is also kind of like a way of them saying, I can work from home so I don't have to work as much, right? Or I can work less, or I can be lazy. And those are not synonyms, right? It's about making things work, especially in the economy that we have. A lot of people can work from home, other people can't. So this is what you have to learn. Again, not just the technology, but now all the transpersonal skills, all the things inside of you, right? That make it hard. Also the things around your environment, right? The things about, and sorry, I have the window, maybe I should close it. All the things around your environment, like that, right? Noise, the light, the background, your video, audio, equipment, hardware, right? All of that. And then based on those things, well, what do you actually have to do? So like maybe you're a person who's working remotely, and really all you need is to meet with a few clients every once in a while. Right? And that's something, right? But that's different than if you have to like sell all the time, right? Be on video and sell and sell and sell, or have and go to a lot of meetings, okay? So the reason that we fight against what I'm calling the dumbbell effect. And the dumbbell effect is in both sides. On one side, people think, well, this is so easy. You don't need a book. You don't need anything. You just do it, and it's easy. You don't need to learn it anywhere, right? It's so easy, so easy, so easy, right? And on the other side is people who say this is so hard, so hard, so hard, so hard, right? Like, oh man, this never works, or I don't know how to work this, or I've never used it, I don't want to. I just want things to go back to normal so we can go back to doing whatever we were doing. Well, I can tell you that both of those people are wrong. Both of those groups are wrong, okay? It's not as easy as it seems, especially if you're doing it periodically, if you have many calls, if you have many things that need to happen in a certain time, in a certain way, right? It's one thing to talk with your family, you know, you get together and you get together in Zoom so you can interact, see how everybody's doing, you know, once, you know, every week or something. And if it doesn't really quite connect, if somebody can't quite hear, you can kind of, you know, figure it out, right? But when you have to do many of these repeatedly and with many people, you just multiply all these different variables, and the errors and the possible things that can happen just grow exponentially, okay? That's what happens. So so you want to figure that out. Once you figured out remote work, once you know how to actually do that, again, how to manage the technology and all the tool chains, how to manage yourself, your space, your background, your audio, your video, and your time, your productivity, your being, right? And then also how to work each piece. Okay, here's what I do when I do a podcast, and we have workflows in the book about each one of these. Here's what I do when I do a sales call. Here's what I do when I have a project meeting. Here's what I do when I'm trying to pitch, you know, people like that I'm communicating with in a virtual way, in a remote way, right? So like you figure that out, then the next step is virtualization, okay? So what is the difference between remote work and virtualization? Well, when we're talking about actually working with companies, see, because individuals, there's never companies. Companies don't exist. What exists is individuals that work in companies, okay? So the virtualization is the integration of all these virtual teams, of all this virtual work around different projects with different parts moving around. So each of the members of the team need to have this covered before they get here, right? I'll give you an example. We have a possible prospect, and a coaching client maybe found a lead in Lima, and it's basically one of the biggest copper and zinc mines in the world. So, and of course they're stopped to a halt. And so what are they going to do? What are the virtual things that they can do? And the reason that the mine is so apropos is because obviously you can do a lot of things in administrative things, paperwork things, planning things, HR, training. You can do a lot of things virtually, but obviously the actual mining of the mine, you can't do that virtually. You ask, maybe you can. If you get some robots and remote control them, that would be cool. But again, so once we figure this out and we give every individual, every one of the stakeholders the guide on how to use the technology, how to manage themselves and their surroundings, and how to apply that in the different ways that they have to do it. Now we have to start putting those members together and saying, okay, this is how we do this, or here are the things that we can do virtual, okay? And this is not just gonna be because of the coronavirus or whatever is going on. Not at all. You will see that there are many companies that have been thrust into this reality along, my companies, also others. I've had to shut some things down that are just not doing anything anymore, and that's just the reality of it. But then because of this process, many companies are gonna go, wait a minute, actually this kind of works, right? Maybe we don't need such a big office. Maybe we don't need such a big overhead. Maybe we can cut here, maybe we can cut this, right? Maybe we don't need different locations with this or this or that. Maybe we just need a central hub, and then these other people can be more like satellites that we can manage remote. I mean, this is what's gonna happen. People are gonna be carrying on so many meetings and so many things that are, if they're good and they're effective at figuring this out, then they'll start to do this naturally. Even after the crisis and everything goes back to normal, let's say, or to a new normal, people are gonna do more and more virtual things. Why? Because this was a trend that was happening, and it was increasing and increasing, right? When John first took one of his companies virtual back in the late 80s, right? He was an exception. Right? People were like, you work from home? What? people work from home. Like, what do you do, right? So, and he did that, and then of course in the 90s, still not as common. As we approached the 2000s, you found some people that work from home, but still that was kind of rare. In the 2010s now, it was a little bit more common, but still you wouldn't find too many people. But it's something that's becoming more and more prevalent. And this whole thing is just gonna precipitate that adoption curve. People are just gonna climb that over. So that's virtualization. What are all the different pieces that you need for the company to work? And we get to the bottom, which is having a completely distributed company. Okay? So how do you go from the individual to teams to companies? So here you can think of this like, the how do you figure out the virtualization of your sales process, right? Perhaps you have salespeople who are calling, salespeople who are pitching, salespeople who are prospecting, salespeople who are presenting to people to pitch them on whatever the product, service, idea might be. And so that's the virtualization. Now, the distributed company is how do you get the sales team with the marketing guys over here, right? And then maybe with the HR over here, maybe with the operations, maybe the engineers that are over here. Like all this different, now we have something that's completely distributed, right? And we're not saying that this is necessarily going to supplant completely any kind of one-on-one. What we're saying though is that this process of simplifying, of streamlining, of communicating effectively remotely, it's just going to continue on. And the companies that really figure this out, and the individuals that really figure this out, they will be a step ahead, or 2 or 10 steps ahead of everybody else. And this is just the nature of it. It's going to happen. If you're sitting there thinking, well, things are just going to go back to normal next week or next month, we were thinking that in February, right? And this is April, and it seems it's not going to be until May, and then in May it won't be until June, and then June it won't be until July. And I posted this on my social media yesterday. Flattening the curve, right? When they talk about flattening the curve, right? The x-axis on that curve is time, right? But they don't tell you no graphs that you've seen out there online. What they don't tell you is how long the x is going to be, because we don't know, right? And by flattening it, sure, we don't have big spikes, but we're still going to have a lot of contagion for a long time, right? And that's just the nature of it. So this is going to be more and more a reality, and in the short, in the medium, and the long term. So I advise, if you're an individual, you're a sales professional, or you're an entrepreneur, or you have a company, or you work for a company, you're maybe a decision maker in a company, you need to figure this out, and you need to figure this out ASAP. Because if you don't, what's going to happen is the companies that do, as this gets worse or the same or just lasts for a while, they're going to be more and more productive. And trust me, you don't want to just wing this. You don't want to just wing it. You don't. Okay? Again, the dumbbell effect, right? The guys that say, "Oh, this is so easy. I don't need a book. I don't need to learn this. I don't need to think about it because we'll just kind of make it work." You don't understand. Since everybody's working remotely and everybody's you need to think about communication more than if you didn't. Because if you're in the office, and I got interviewed by the great Heather Wagenhals. When was this? Last week. Yeah, last week. And we were talking about the book, and we were, she's got a big audience. She's got like 30-something thousand followers on Instagram and places. And she does a show called Unlock Your Wealth. And on Unlock Your Wealth, she talks to all these entrepreneurs and stuff, people like that. And so we were talking about distributed teams. And one of the things that we were talking about was like, okay, so you got to figure this out, because if you don't if you don't get really specific, then you're actually not gonna do anything. You're gonna waste more time, and now you're gonna really want to go back. You're gonna want to see if we can go back in time and figure this out, because you're like, well, this is too hard, we're wasting too much time. And so she was telling me about, well, that she always liked to have an office because she wanted to be, and this are her words, within a smacking distance of somebody, right? Like if you wanted to go up to somebody and say, hey, are you getting this done? Or, how close are we? And so because we're not going to have that, we're not going to be in the same space. We call this in the book, we're going to be at the same time, different place kind of setting. Then we have to be even more intentional about our communication, even more intentional about specific workflows, even more intentional about deadlines, even more intentional about who's responsible for what, even more intentional about making sure everybody understands and knows what each team member is doing and not doing at a given time. So you're not sitting there at home or your home office and going, so are we moving forward or are we just kind of hanging out? That's the challenge. So again, these are the 3 steps. Remote work first. You got to figure out the individual pieces for an individual person, part of a team. Virtualization, putting teams together. Still, not necessarily huge teams and certainly not teams of teams, but just teams being able to work using all the things that they develop individually. Now how do they work together? And then eventually a whole company, which is teams of teams, everybody distributed. Maybe there's a hub, maybe there's some kind of like the guys that run WordPress, forget the company name, but the guys that came up with WordPress, what they do is they have 2 or 3 retreats a year where they get together live and they really bond and work on like their real social skills so that can help them to communicate with each other when they're virtually, which is most of the year, right? So companies like that, a couple of good articles in The Economist a couple of weeks ago, talking about, okay, what are the lessons that remote companies or companies that have been remote for a while, because that was just the nature of it. Like for example, HubSpot. Some of you guys may be familiar with HubSpot, like WordPress, like the guys at Slack, different people like that. And what are some of the advice? And one of the things that we're talking about is like, hey, we do get together, physically, but we don't get together as often. But when we get together, that's when we really start working those communication skills. You sort of understand more somebody, and the goal of understanding them as good as you can when you're working with them one-on-one is because you're going to be most of the time virtually. So the idea is to get as much of that so you can get a sense for how everybody works and what do they do best and how you can communicate and what is their contribution and how you can gauge that and make sure that you also contribute. So again, these are the 3 steps. Go to Amazon.com, put in remote work. Again, the book name is Remote Work for a Better World. So go ahead. Again, it's 99 cents. Come on, you're not going to Starbucks anyways. And you can get that. Also, I'm gonna be releasing a quiz for pivoting, and it's gonna be on the book's website, on the first book's website, which is positionwinbook.com/pivot. So you can do that. I'm gonna put some of those links down below so that you can access them. And yeah, these are the 3 steps of remote work, the 3 steps of the new era of this new economy where we're going to be doing a lot more things remotely, a lot more things without one-on-one, perhaps a lot more things without big offices, with big overhead that can help you survive. I mean, just think about it. If you have a company and you're paying a big bill for commercial real estate, last month or this month, next month, you're sitting there going, wow, it would be easier if I could cut all of that, right? And I think companies are going to have to figure out, okay, if things were to get tough like this, how much can I streamline and cut in my costs so that I can survive? And that's what a lot of people are trying to do. And if you're not in that boat, you're in the boat more of a pivoting, so definitely go to positionwinbook.com/pivot. And you have to figure this out. Then you got to learn how to do remote work. You got to learn the tools. You got to build your own tool chains that you know how to use, that you know the processes, depending on the different things that you're required to do. If you're a sales guy, it's a different thing than if you're an engineer, different thing. And also learn the psychosocial dynamics of having a call, of staring at a dot on top of your computer. You're like this. It's really as simple as this. Like if you ever had a call with somebody who's like not watching the camera, but they're watching you, right? They're watching like the screen, right? So what happens is that you feel like they're talking to your chin, right? You're like, do I have something? What's going on, right? And so those little tiny things, they don't seem like a big deal, but we gotta learn. Like as I'm doing this video, I know I have to look right in the camera, right? If I start looking somewhere else, then it gets distracting for you. You start thinking about, well, why is he looking? What is he looking at? Is there something I'm missing, right? And so I have to pretend as if this little dot in a device is somebody, right? Those are all, that's just one of the things, right? And they're like that, they're like 100 things. And then on technology, they're like 1,000 things. And then on logistics, they're like infinite things. So how do you combine those two? How are you intentional in what you're doing so that you can be a productive member of society? Because make no mistake, this is going to be the way in which people are going to be there to be productive. They're going to be hired this way. They're going to be interviewed this way. They're going to be evaluated this way. They're going to be expected to perform this way. You know, when people used to like not want to be on video or not like, oh, don't take a picture. Those days are gone. You have a digital representation of your digital self in a little square like that, and everybody's looking at the square and everybody's saying, that's so-and-so, right? And so every little thing inside of that square is a representation of who you are. Just like your shoes or your belt or your haircut would be in a live situation. So you got to make sure that you think about that and be intentional, and those tiny little things, you'd be surprised, they go a long way in getting you the new opportunities or the opportunities that will present themselves, even though everything is being shuffled and going crazy. But we know that, and shuffling is exactly the right word, because it's almost like we're playing poker and somebody grabbed the deck of cards and is shuffling them. And this is what's happening right now. And the idea is, while those cards are being shuffled, what hand is the one that you're gonna get? Are you gonna have a good hand to play, or are you gonna have a bad hand? When in poker, you have no control. It's just complete randomness, right? If somebody's shuffling correctly. But in life, the good thing is that you can be intentional and deal yourself a better hand. Now that everybody's being shuffled their hand, you can go and say, what is the best possible hand that I can have for the next round and the next round and the next round? See you guys in the next one.